Hey, hi, hey, Cube Thinning Draft Tano here. So, different kind of video, it's gonna be a little more casual. I took to the internet and I asked you guys to give me your most underrated cards for Cube. And you didn't disappoint, I actually got a decent amount of responses. So the first response was in the Cube Draft Facebook group. Jimmy said Cauldron Dance. Cauldron Dance is a 6-mana instant for those unaware. You can play it only during combat. You return target creature from your graveyard to play. That creature gains haste. Return it to your hand at end of turn. Put a creature from your hand into play. That creature gains haste. Put it into the graveyard at end of turn. So I really like this card. It's really cool if you have like a sneak and reanimate kind of theme in your cube. It's 6 mana, which is a little expensive, but you get 2 creatures out of it. And yeah, overall the card's really good, I agree. Anthony in that same group said Tristani Discordant, 5 power on board for 5, drops 3 creatures, Anthem, supports tokens and blink strategies. Great stabilizer and fits nicely into a Crater Host strategy. I agree with everything he said. It definitely works really well in like token strategies. If you're playing a good green-white deck, you probably have some kind of token thing going on in most cubes, I would say. But yeah, totally agree. Great card. So Jimmy also brought up one of my absolute favorites, Wildfire, Burning of Chenier, and Upheaval. Yeah, it's honestly one of the most fun things you can do in cubes. It just blow up lands, return everything to hand, and then just like have something on board afterwards to just end the game. I love cubes that have archetypes like this in them. Upheaval is one of my absolute favorite things to draft. So yeah, also totally agree with this. And the next card we're looking at is a card called Jeweled Amulet, which I had actually never heard of. The person who posted said, this card has been excellent as well. Just excellent fixing that supports deck diversity and can find inclusion in many cube styles. I run it in my power, artifact, and horror cubes. So I did have to look this card up. It is a 0-mana artifact, which are usually pretty good. With this, you can pay 1 and tap it to put a charge counter on Jeweled Amulet. Note what type of mana was used to pay this activation cost. Use this ability only if there are no charge counters on Jeweled Amulet. You can then tap to remove a counter and add 1 mana of the type used to put the counter on there to your mana pool. Be super honest, I'm not a big fan of this card. It doesn't ramp, it doesn't filter colors, you're not really gaining a whole lot from playing it. I can definitely see this, like you mentioned, in an artifact cube where you just want a bunch of artifacts, especially if you have like some kind of Cheerios strategy or just like something super, super dependent on artifacts. Overall though, I think I would rather have like a Signet or even like a Talisman over this. Yeah, I'm not super into it. The next response was from Reddit. Someone said, Dream Eater is one of my favorite blue finishers for Cube. It has flash, 4 power in the air, and 2 extremely relevant ETBs. Its only downside is the 3 toughness, which in my opinion is totally fine compared to everything else it has going for it. It works in control, it's great for Simic Flash, Flicker decks, Reanimator as a target. If I'm in blue, I'll absolutely run this card. I mean, yeah, I think it's a fine card. More often than not, I'm gonna want like a Consecrated Sphinx in blue. I definitely agree that the 2 ETB triggers are super, super relevant. And I mean, as like a blue top end card, it's definitely good. It's not my favorite. I think in definitely more of like a modern power level cube, I think it's great. So another comment on Reddit said Vollrath Shapeshifter for old border cubes, which is another one I had actually never heard of. I had to look this one up. So Vollrath Shapeshifter is a 3-mana creature. It's a 0/1. As long as the top card of your graveyard is a creature card, Vollrath Shapeshifter is a copy of that card, except it retains its abilities. You can also pay 2 and choose and discard a card. Yeah, I agree. I think this is a really interesting card. I've definitely never heard of this, obviously. I definitely see this as being kind of like you said, like a sneak and show-ish card. I think there's a lot of variance to this, but it's definitely interesting. I think it could definitely see some play somewhere. I think I definitely see this, especially like if someone has specifically an old border cube and they want to have more of like a reanimator thing, I think this is a great option. So another comment from Reddit said Toolcraft Exemplar, and I have to agree. I love this card so dearly. It's a 1-mana, 1/1 in white. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control an artifact, Toolcraft Exemplar gets +2/+1 until end of turn. If you control 3 or more artifacts, it also gains first strike. Yeah, artifact aggro in Cube is one of my absolute favorite things to draft, to build. It's, for whatever reason, I've just always loved artifacts. And yeah, this guy's great, especially in cubes that have that artifact aggro deck. So like Seal Overseer, Ravager, just any number of small artifact-based cards. Obviously power are just like cheap ramp artifacts. Yeah, I think this card's super cool. So next comment on Reddit was Herald of Anguish is a sweet big black creature for reanimation strategies with a decent but not game warping ability. Solid body with evasion and feels manageable if cast early. It's got solid stats as a 5/5 flyer, has an instep trigger so you can gain some value the turn after putting it into play, and it's a card that other decks with an artifact lean will want to play due to the improvise ability, making it readily castable. There are so many more incidental artifact bodies nowadays that it's not all that difficult to actually play this on turn 5 on curve without missing a beat. So I totally agree. I love cubes that have Reanimator in it. Not only is just like the typical combo Reanimator, but just as like value reanimation targets that aren't necessarily game winning. And yeah, I think Herald of Anguish is fine. I think you definitely bring up a good point with the artifacts. Like we literally just talked about. I love artifact aggro as a deck. Yeah, Herald of Anguish is cool. Improvise is a really interesting mechanic. Got a lot going for it. The sacrifice an artifact to give a creature -2/-2 can definitely be relevant. Yeah, thumbs up. So the next Reddit comment said, I'm picking 2 cards that can help red be more than just the aggro color. Something that bothers me is when red is used in slower decks, it's often just a splash for some efficient removal spells. For example, in Grixis Jeskai Control, I'd like UR Control to be just as viable as UB, UW. And the 2 cards they suggested, they wrote a lot, which I'm not going to read all of this because this would be a super long video. But the 2 cards they listed are Mizzium Mortars and Hour of Devastation. And yeah, I think Mizzium Mortars is another great card. Anger of the Gods is a really cool like red board wipe. I think this is arguably worse than Anger of the Gods. Anger of the Gods is, 3 mana. This to overload it is 6. It does only hit creatures you don't control, and it is 4 damage, which is better. And also, 4 damage for 2 is pretty good. So maybe this is actually better. Or at least on par. I don't know. I like the card. I agree Mizzium Mortars is definitely overlooked in a lot of conversations about red removal in Cube, and I think it's really good. And Hour of Devastation is a 5 mana sorcery that reads, all creatures lose indestructible until end of turn. Hour of Devastation deals 5 damage to each creature and each non-bolus planeswalker. And yeah, again, like I think red could definitely use more of these like board wipey effects. For 5 mana, 5 damage to most things is a pretty good rate. Yeah, again, I like it. They also mentioned a 3rd card called Violent Eruption and said, you know how good Inferno Titan is? This is similar, but at instant speed, which allows more blowout moments. I kind of disagree. I think Violent Eruption is a little meh for most cubes. I would much rather have Inferno Titan. Violent Eruption is a 4 mana instant that deals 4 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or players. I don't get the comparison necessarily to Inferno Titan. It does have Madness for 3, which is interesting, but I'm personally not a huge fan. So another Redditor said, I think Fate Spinner encourages really interesting play patterns and deck building restrictions. Also just one of my faves. I agree. Fate Spinner is a card that I've always thought was really cool and doesn't really get a lot of hype, I guess. So Fate Spinner is a 3 mana, 1/2 creature at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep. That player chooses draw step, main phase, or combat phase. The player skips each instant of the chosen step or phase this turn. Yeah, I totally agree. This card is super cool. It's super fun. It's a really interesting design. I would love to see more stuff like this. I think the main reason it doesn't see a lot of cube play is it doesn't synergize well with a lot of different strategies. I mean, obviously it is like a control-ish card or like a tax stacks kind of thing, but it's, it's a 1/2 blue creature for 3. I think it definitely has a place somewhere. It's really interesting. I would love to see more cubes try it. I might try it out in my cube just for, the hell of it. But yeah, I definitely think there's a reason it doesn't see a ton of play as much as I do love the card. Okay, so this one I love. This is another Reddit comment. Limduel's Vault is like a vamp tutor that also lets you know and rearrange your next 4 draws. I agree. I have wondered for a very long time why Limduel's Vault doesn't see more cube play. So Limduel's Vault is kind of a mouthful. It is a blue-black instant with a text. Look at the top 5 cards of your library as many times as you choose. You may pay 1 life, put those cards on the bottom of your library in any order, then look at the top 5 cards of your library, then shuffle your library and put the last cards you looked at this way on top of it in any order. So yeah, it's a mouthful. But like they said, I agree, it is a really good tutor and also just rearranges the top of your deck. And you can do it repeatedly, which is really strong. I love Limduel's Vault. I think it's a great card in EDH. I think it would be really fun to see more cubes play this card. So back to the Facebook group, Leslie said that equal treatment stops Alpha Strike / fatties, stops lethal burn spells, makes your bunch of 1/1s deal more, activate Goblin Bombardment a few times, respond, end of turn cantrip if you can't get good timing. This is another card that I had never heard of before. Equal Treatment is a 2 mana instant. If any source would deal 1 or more damage to a creature or player this turn, it deals 2 damage to that creature or player instead. Draw a card. So yeah, this is definitely interesting. I do think that he raises some good points here. I definitely think this sees play in some cubes. It is interesting that it's a white cantrip that also kind of buffs up 1/1s. I think it might be a little narrow for a lot of cubes, which is kind of why we don't see a lot of play with this. But I do think maybe someone out there could definitely use this. And Eric from the MTG Cube Drafting group said, Mirror Mockery is a sweet card that can be used both as semi-removal and enabler of extra ETBs. So Mirror Mockery is a 2-mana enchantment that enchants a creature. When an enchanted creature attacks, you may put a token on the battlefield that's a copy of that creature, exile that token at the end of combat. Yeah, I agree. I love cards like this that kind of have multiple uses. They can either benefit you or they can act as removal. I personally don't like giving blue a lot of abilities like this in my cube just because blue is already so pushed in every other way. I think kind of similar with like Reality Shift. I think it's too good of a card for blue to have access to. Otherwise, there's no incentive to play other colors. But if you do like supporting like blue removal or even just copy effects in blue, this is definitely a great thing. Love the card. Not personally into it for my cube though. So my camera overheated. If anything looks shifted, that's probably why. So another Reddit comment says, I'm a sucker for underrated beaters, so I have to go with Mindrack Demon and Honored Hydra. In my Pioneer cube, they slot into GB Delirium Shells so well. The Demon, despite its drawback, is a serious clock, and the 5 toughness makes it very hard to remove via damage. Trample and flying mean it will punch through any puny flyers. It can be a risky play, but I find it very flavorful, and it invites you to look again at some of the double types like Courser of Krufix, Gearhulks, and such. So yeah, I agree. I think this is cool if you have like a specific Delirium shell built into your cube. I think on average, it's a little weak for a general, like, you know, legacy vintage kind of cube, but it's definitely fun. I like this card. The Hydra doesn't do anything special when it comes into play. It's just a thing with trample, so why would you play it over something like Carnage Tyrant, which was kind of my first thought. Well, firstly, it's a super cheap option for your big stompy finisher with the added benefit of coming back for cheaper if it gets removed. Secondly, it goes very well with discard or self-mill synergies. Play Noose Constrictor, swing in, and discard the Hydra to bring it back as a 6/6 trampler on turn 4. Mill it with Grizzly Salvage and enjoy. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it sounds like you have a cube that's really well synergized to make these cards work their best. I don't know if I would call these underrated cube cards. I think they're okay, and in the right circumstances, like what you have, they can be really good. But yeah, generally I'd agree. I would prefer like a Carnage Tyrant in most cubes unless you have a specific archetype that makes this better. And the same person said, for the sake of color equality, I'll also mention Fearless Fledgling, which I also enjoy for the little synergies with +1/+1 counters, as well as just being a pretty nice 2-drop in WX aggro decks. And yeah, I agree. I think Fearless Fledgling is a cool card. I love landfall as a mechanic, especially cubes with like fast spawn and ways to take advantage of landfall. And yeah, building up like an aerial threat's never a bad thing, especially in colors like white, where you can really take advantage of that. And they also mentioned Dream Eater, which we've already talked about a little bit. Again, I think it's a good card. They also brought up Skargon Hellkite. I love dragons, and obviously the Hellkite isn't as good as what probably is the best dragon in cube, aka Glorybringer, but Skargon is still super flexible, offering direct life pressure in the air at the cost of a little power or more controlling option to remove small creatures. Nip at Walker's loyalty or your opponent's life if you're, I'm assuming that's supposed to say, find yourself lacking resources in the late game. And yeah, I mean, you've said it really well. I think most of the time Glorybringer is a better card, but this is definitely a nice alternative, and it's similar enough. I don't think this is like severely underpowered. I do think 4 mana for the activated ability is a little steep, but if you specifically want to avoid Glorybringer, or if you just want more cards kind of in that vein, it's decent. And last thing on Reddit, we have Hermit Druid. It is one of the most broken creatures of all time, but almost never in cubes. It's a cheap and repeatable source of card advantage with graveyard synergies, as well as a build around for combo decks, e.g. Nexus of Fate, Thassa's Oracle. I agree. I love Hermit Druid so much. That card is so insane. It's one of my favorite cards in EDH. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think cube can definitely stand to take advantage of Hermit Druid. I never see it either. I think it's incredible. I'm probably gonna go add that in my cube right now. Hermit Druid's sick. But yeah, that's it. Thank you guys so much for contributing to this, for watching to the end. If you want to see more of these, please let me know in the comments below. I'm likely going to do another one of these in the next few weeks. The Reddit that I posted this in is r/MTGCube, also the MTG Cube Drafting group on Facebook. I'll also post the theme of the next video in the comments on this video. So if you're not on either of those sites, you can still contribute going forward. I haven't figured out what I want to do yet, or if you guys even want to see more. But yeah, thank you guys again so much for watching. We'll see you next time.